So it is going to be a good day on the show because we are here to give you some information about a couple nonprofits that you may not have heard about. Unfortunately, they're not going to be with us today in the studio, though. We've got them on the line, which is cool. They're going to bring some really good information, good energy on the line. So we're excited to talk to you about the Georgia Climate Project, and we're going to bring the co-founder of the organization on the line in just a bit, Daniel Rockberg. He also happens to work at Emory, so he's in academia. He knows the space and sort of all of the science behind, climate change and what's happening with our state. And there's a lot of partners in this and coming together to do a conference. Mm-hmm. And they are going to be talking about climate change in our state, across the nation, I guess, but in our state particularly, and talking about the issues that are coming from it and the impact that it's having on regular folks like you and me. So you're going to want to stick around, hear about that. And climate change is something that we hear about in the news, but it would be interesting to hear from his perspective how they're bringing it down to the local, everyday level, and getting people to understand the importance of climate change and to pay attention to it and just to care.
I just kind of feel like, and I'm looking forward to talking to him because I just really feel like when we talk about climate change, it always seems so big. Mm-hmm. It's not a personal, it impacts people personally, but the solutions don't seem personal. Yeah. Other than, you need to vote for this kind of candidate or we need this kind of thing or whatever. The solutions I feel like are so big that it becomes very easy for individual people as you go through your normal day-to-day life to ignore. Versus when we used to talk about global warming, which I guess is the same, whatever. Global warming back in the day when you used to be able to say like, okay, well, recycle or do whatever. Like there were tangible things that individual people could do in order to ebb the tide. But now I feel like, I
don't think people even put that two to two together anymore.
I don't think so. I think there's like it's good for the environment.
It's good for the environment. It goes in one bucket.
The environment. Like I'm doing my part. But I also feel like sometimes the solutions that we hear, like Greta her.
I know.
Right. So like this whole thing about like, okay, so air travel is bad. Get that. Yeah. Totally understand. I don't have 6
get there.
I don't have 6 weeks to spend on a boat to go here. So I need another solution. That's the kind of stuff. Yes. Like when we talk about climate change now and these very big issues and when politicians talk about, the Green Deal and you hear about these things about like, air travel and whatever. And it's like, okay, I understand that these things are bad. I get it. However, if I got to be in LA, I can't take a wagon. Like I gotta get there.
Take one. It's just going to take you about 3 weeks to get there.
Right, and it'd be like the Oregon Trail. So I need somebody. What I, am interested in at this point, and maybe we can learn a little bit more, is how we can apply some of these things to our personal lives in a realistic way, in addition to the idea of advocating for policy and that kind of stuff to change. Because, yes, we need better public transportation. I can't do nothing about that. I can vote. I can pay the penny.
Well, you could get your car off the road.
Well, I drive a hybrid.
No, but your car is the problem. The better transportation for me is the less people. Less people is less pollution, but then it's also quicker than I can get to where I need to go.
Could move.
No, that's not
people
that's
like
not
you
an option.
Are the problem.
No,
who
I'm
choose
not the problem.
To live.
Because you know what? Outside of the thing that they just shut down in my community, I don't pollute. I don't have that. I live around a lot of trees. I have trees that are photosynthesizing and cleaning the air.
But I do think one thing that's interesting that we both of us are probably guilty of is that we live in too much space.
That's not a problem for
me. You may not think of it as a problem, but I'm just saying that. Does one person...
What do you mean in too much space? Like in the house?
Yeah, if you think about it, I live in 1,500 square feet as one person. Do I as one person
need... tiny house thing.
Me either. I don't want to. So I'm saying it's probably a part of the problem because if you think about what you have to do to heat and cool and maintain
here's the thing. I only use one of my air conditioners though. So I have another one.
The fact that you have to,
because
for
I didn't
one
put them in.
person,
That's how they built it.
but that's what I'm saying. That like I'm not saying like you and me I'm just saying in general. Do we as people take up too much space? So therefore,
my argument for that
to,
is,
there's a person
space,
over here off camera who's nodding, who agrees with me.
But then there's another person who is not paying attention. So my personal space boundary, especially when I'm at home, is probably larger. And for me, it goes back, and this is all interwoven, because for my mental state to be positive, I have to have so much space.
You're like this big.
I have
so
to
you
have
need
so
this
much
space. Like you're this big. How much space
but
do you
that doesn't
need?
equate to how my everybody's different, right? So some
so
people,
it's like you're this big, but you have this much personality,
and that much
and
much
then I need
space
all
that
the
I need.
space
I don't
around.
want people on top of me. Like,
but there's
I
no
don't
other
like when
people.
people's houses, like you can reach out and touch somebody's house.
Well, see, I guess my point is,
I don't like all of that. So I like to be able to spread out, especially when I'm at home. That's where my comfort zone is. You would want me to be comfortable, because that's how I show up in the world. If I'm like falling down, where I feel the world is falling in on me, which is a great movie. But if I'm like that guy stuck in traffic and my whole world is collapsing, you know what the end of that story was. Just saying.
Not good.
So it's not
I
good.
just think about for myself. I'll take you
it
out
a
of
different way.
I'll take you out of the equation.
Okay.
For myself, I'm not moving, and I will never.
Then you should move.
And I'm never
See?
gonna have
You
a.
should
and I'm
move
never
in a
gonna
tiny house.
I'm not saying a tiny house, but I'm saying it's like if I'm alone.
Downsize.
I know.
It's your argument. You should put your
I'm
money
not
where your mouth is.
disagreeing with the argument.
Put your
I'm saying
money
I'm
where
not
your
going to
mouth
do it, but
You want other people to do it.
I'm just making an observation that we
I think the problem right now is probably the styrofoam. Like, I can get with that. This is a problem. However,
I know, and I could have had a reusable cup.
See,
so
these are the small things that we can. I think
these are the
this.
small things. So we need to. That's a question that
I'm
we need to
down with
ask.
this,
Like,
yes.
what else can we do as individuals?
And we have done our straws. We did
We
the
have our
stainless
straws. I do
steel
not use straws anymore. I rarely get a straw.
Yeah.
When I go out. But I don't know. But see, that's the thing. That's for the animals. So like turtles don't have straws up their nose. But is
Right.
that helpful?
Yes, because the circle of life.
But they can't recycle, so they don't even get
Like,
recycled.
who can't recycle?
Straws
Oh, I
cannot
thought
be
you meant the
recycled.
turtle. I was like, what?
No,
Why
turtles
wasn't this
decompose, so
You're
that
right.
is nature's
I thought-
recycling.
but they couldn't recycle as in a verb. Like, they couldn't recycle
no,
stuff.
well,
I was like,
I don't
that's
think
obvious.
turtles can. No, but that's my thing. So like, we don't use straws because that helps the animals. But is that the
Yes.
environment?
Because like stuff eats the turtles, and then they would have the plastic in them, and then they would die. So it's all cyclical. I feel like, and
Obviously.
then the whales get beached, and then it's like
This is
it's
why
all-
we have experts from different organizations.
but I feel like that goes together.
I think
though.
everything is the circle of life
Yeah.
because Mufasa said so, and why not?
I mean, that's what you learn in school. It all goes together.
I feel like now I need James Earl Jones to sit down and explain to me how the antelopes and the wildebeest all live together. It's the great circle of life.
But I guess now, did you ever watch that show? It was
Captain Planet. He's
No,
a
I did. I
hero.
watched Captain Planet, but
Gotta
that was
take
I was
pollution.
talking about I can't remember the name of it though. It was about I think it was about climate change, but all of these animals kept turning on the people. Zoo. You should watch Zoo. You should.
That doesn't sound like something I would watch.
I am telling you, I thought it wasn't.
Did birds
And
do
that-
it? See, that's what I
birds
think.
and everything.
See, that's what I think. I think the movie The Birds is about. Like it's starting. It was the very beginning of Nature Gone Loco. Like, why are all the birds all these? Because their point
That's just that
was
they had all of those
No.
movies. They had killer bees. They had snakes. They had spiders.
no. The Birds is before that. The Hitchcock movie.
They had all those. I'm telling. Way back
I know,
in
but
the 80s,
still,
they had all of those.
But that's
all
like
of
a
those
60s
animals.
Movie. That's earlier.
Well,
Like
all of those things.
I know, but
happened.
the whole thing though about the birds was it wasn't just one type of bird. It was like different birds.
That's why you have to watch
flocking
Zoo.
together and attacking.
That's why you have to watch Zoo.
Did I ever tell you when I went to so I went to San Francisco. I went to Bodega Bay.
Okay.
Tippi Hedren was there. And then that call, that noise from the movie.
Right.
I stepped outside to take a picture and the bird started making that noise. And I was like, I have to leave this area. I can't be here. And Tippi Hedren was there because I just feel like because that was the whole
had a
thing.
sound machine.
No, but she was like in a hotel. But that was the whole thing about the birds.
Did you even see her?
No, she was there doing an appearance. Like she was literally on Bodega Bay that day doing an appearance, like signing autographs or whatever. And I was like, in the movie, they are all like, this woman showed up and it made the birds go crazy.
Yeah.
So then my friend that I was traveling with, she and I were like, oh my God, Tippi Hedren is here. I'm already kind of like, I don't know how I feel about going to Bodega Bay because of the birds. But then we get there and Tippi Hedren's there and then the birds are making the noise.
Was that movie about climate change?
No, it was about crazy birds.
Okay.
But my thing is, were the birds going crazy because of climate change?
It might have been, but I think watch Zoo. Just go back and watch it. I'm telling you, that is a good series.
Why do I need to see a movie about animals?
It's not a movie; it's a show.
Oh, why do I see a show about animals attacking people?
Because it's real. It's real sciencey, and it's not all animals. Like some of them are good. That thing is action packed.
Okay. Our other guest on this show today is going to be Mr. Keith Jennings. He's does community impact for Jackson Healthcare, so not related to climate change, but also a very important topic. So we're going to be back after the break with Daniel to talk about climate and maybe get
Georgia Climate Project.
Yes, and maybe get some of our questions answered on this, and maybe we'll be able to speak a little bit more intelligently next time.
You're listening to The Good Work Show.
To learn more about the show and how your company can tell their story, like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter @Good Work Show.
Audience, welcome back to The Good Work Show. We are on the line with Daniel Rockberg, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Climate at Emory. And you are also the co-founder of a super huge conference that's coming up, Georgia Climate Project Conference. So welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So first off, tell us about your role, Climate at Emory, and what you do.
Sure. So I'm at Emory University, and Emory, like really every other school on the planet, I hope, is trying to do its part to move the needle on climate change, which certainly I see and we see as one of the century's defining challenges. And so for us at Emory, that means how can we pull together faculty and staff and students to try to move forward at sort of take what we do well as a university and apply that to climate change. So how do we teach and how do we train today's students to be tomorrow's leaders? How do we do research? How do we deepen our understanding and the world's understanding of climate impacts and solutions? And this is a good sort of segue to the Georgia Climate Conference. How do we engage in our community? And that's something that we're trying to do as well, to be not only sitting in our desks doing our research and talking to each other, but much more importantly, bringing that expertise and engaging with partners outside of academia.
Cool. So now that we talked a little bit about the conference, tell us a little bit more about it. Who's going to be what is it? Who's going to be there? What do you hope to accomplish at the whole event?
I'd be happy to. Yeah, we're really excited for this conference. And just a little bit of the background and context is that this conference is hosted by a group called the Georgia Climate Project. And that is not only Emory, but Emory working in partnership with University of Georgia and Georgia Tech as the founding partners of the project. But even more important to us is that we've since grown to include a number of universities across the state. So we are partnering now with Georgia Southern University, University of North Georgia, Columbus State, and then here in the Atlanta area, Agnes Scott and Spelman College. And so we're really delighted to have a really broad group of universities and colleges, and that list is still growing. We hope to have some more announcements soon. And the whole idea of the Georgia Climate Project is that we have tremendous expertise around the state on this issue, and we want to position the state so that anytime a leader or a practitioner at the state level or the local level wants to move forward on this issue and they say, help, we want hundreds of hands to go up and say, we're really glad you asked, and here we are, and how can we help you?
That's great. And I love how you're bringing academia to it because obviously people are studying climate change. They are, of course, they're probably teaching it within the schools and colleges that you mentioned. But then also it probably gives another layer of validity to the work that you're doing. And when people come to you and they're looking for it, you can present the information from the standpoint of research, right?
Yeah, that's the hope. And, and two thoughts on that. First, absolutely, the research side and the kind of the expertise side is really important. We see ourselves as a nonpartisan effort and an effort where our credibility is going to rest on our ability to provide robust information in a way that is nonpartisan, not advocating a particular solution or policy, rather, but just getting information out there and being a resource. And the second piece is that there is just no way the state moves forward if any of us stay in our silos. So though we are a partnership of academic institutions, from the outset, we've been working and delighted to work with partners in the public sector, the private sector, nonprofits, et cetera. And that's really what we're trying to do then at the conference, is to have that broader community there. It's not at all an academic conference. It's a really sort of multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral conference.
So share with our audience. So folks are out there listening and they're like, okay, so it's colleges and some people are getting together to talk about climate change and it all sounds real big. So break it down for our audience and explain to them a little bit on why is this important? Why should folks right here in the state of Georgia? So we hear about climate change and we hear about it from the point of view of coastal. I'm from South Florida, so I keep hearing that my hometown is going to be underwater in 10 years or whatever it is.
And I'm from California, so the whole state's just going to fall off.
Right. or burn up or whatever it is. So tell us kind of bring it home for us, for our listeners, on why right here in the state of Georgia, this is something that folks should be paying attention to and caring about.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm really glad you asked the question and framed it that way because I think it's really important. This is such a big issue and it's complicated and it's global, but I think that can be overwhelming for folks and just confusing, and it's hard to understand why does it matter for Georgia and what do we do about it. From my perspective, the changes that are happening kind of fall into three buckets. It's getting warmer, that's making things weirder, and those two together make things worse, right, on balance. For Georgia, what that means is the warmer part is pretty straightforward. It's really hot. We've globally had 18 of the 19 warmest years on record since 2000, so every year so far. And then locally here in Atlanta, we just set a record, unfortunately, this year. Most days above 90 degrees in a year ever this year is one example of the heat we're facing. That, of course, itself has its own health-related and labor-related impacts and concerns. But that's just the warmer part. Then you get to the weirder. So what does weirder look like in Georgia? It means sea levels are rising, both because water is expanding and the glaciers are melting. So on the coast of Georgia, the sea level there is about 8 or 9 inches higher now than it was 100 years ago.
Wow.
And in practical terms, that means that we have roads and communities that used to see maybe every so often on a really, really high tide on a sunny day, they'd get a little bit of flooding. That's happening a lot, several times a year now, and it's projected to happen just a ton going forward. This idea of sunny day flooding, where it's not yet an extreme weather event or anything else.
So is that from the tides?
It is. So it's basically, obviously tides go up and down all the time, but when they're doing that on top of a higher floor,
right,
even 8 or 9 inches, all of a sudden, the sort of poster child in Georgia historically has been the road that connects the mainland Georgia to Tybee Island, Highway 80, prior to its elevation this year, was flooding on a multiple times a year basis and shutting down the entire road.
Wow.
That's just one example. That's obviously concerning, and especially as we look forward and what that might look like in the future. And there, it's pretty concerning. We're seeing projections from the U.S. government of low end in Georgia, maybe 1.5 feet by the end of the century, but high end, like maybe north of 8 or 9 or 10 feet by the end of the century. And probably the best guess is somewhere in the middle of those two. But even at 1.5 feet, that's just a game changer for communities on the coast in terms of how they're planning not only their daily lives, but their infrastructure.
Right.
So that's one example, and I think the coasts are where we're going to feel it. The other way that kind of weirder carries out into worse is in the agricultural sector in Georgia, where it's a real issue. So for ag, obviously ag is it's the number one industry in Georgia if you look at agriculture and forestry together. but it's an industry that by its very nature is vulnerable to changes in nature. So certainly extreme weather events like Hurricane Michael can be devastating, and we lost UGA estimated $2.5 billion in our ag industry from that one storm alone. And those storms are projected to get more intense under a changing climate. And then there are more subtle changes that are still quite significant. Droughts, we're projecting an increasing frequency and intensity of droughts, and we know that that can also be sort of on the magnitude of $1 billion of losses if we look at past droughts. And then at the sort of like month-to-month level, we look at things like just how hot is the winter, for example. We have blueberry producers in the state who it was just a little bit warmer than it used to be in January and February, and that meant the blooms were coming out, the blueberries were coming out, and then when we had a normal frost in March, all of a sudden they're vulnerable in a way that they never were before. We had something kind of similar with peaches where it just simply didn't get cold enough over the winter a couple years ago for the crop to thrive. So for the ag industry, it's really a major challenge that they are already contending with and they're going to need to grapple with for decades to come. And then here in Atlanta and in urban communities around the state, we worry a lot about our vulnerable populations. It's often the case, unfortunately, that those who have done the least to cause the problem in terms of emissions of pollution are also the most vulnerable. And that plays out globally as well as here in our local urban communities. And so you have communities like watersheds in Atlanta that have had urban flooding for years for a lot of reasons. But if you anticipate more extreme flooding, all of a sudden those who are already quite vulnerable are going to get hit even harder.
Yeah.
So we worry about that. So it's like a lot of little things. If you're in those communities, those little things are actually quite big things. And then if you zoom out and look at the entire state, it really adds up.
Yeah, that's well. So if anybody was questioning why they should care, I think you just gave us something for everybody.
Yeah, I know.
And the weird is the part that,
yeah,
because I think everybody kind of looks at the weather and like, that's just weird. Like,
Yeah.
why is that happening? Why is it snowing in April and 90 degree? It's just weird.
How do you?
It is weird. And like it is true that weather has always been weird,
Right.
Since the beginning of time. But what it is weirder and weirder in ways that have a very significant or specific fingerprint of, okay, this is what happens if you actually do change the Earth's climate system.
Yeah. So Daniel, we're going to take a break in a couple of minutes, but I think you answered sort of, as Trini said, the why, how everybody should care. But if I'm dealing with 10 other things that are super important, taxes or, air pollution. I happen to live in Covington where there's lots of talk about air pollution these days out there. So if I'm dealing with all of these other things, maybe some of them environmental, maybe some of them aren't. How do you get people to stop and think about the things that you just mentioned? Because when weather just breaks out all of a sudden, it's a nuisance, or if it's a big storm, maybe I have to evacuate, maybe I don't. If I'm on the coast, I'm not really affected by that. But just in their daily life, how do you get people to really care about it enough to say, I want to do something to change? Because behavior change is really the hardest thing. You can get people to believe something, think something, but then to make an action, I think is where we'd love to pick your brain and talk to you a little bit more about what the Georgia Climate Project is thinking about doing, or have you had those conversations around the table and how you might start moving the needle. So I want to get you thinking about that while we take a break, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that. And then also about the conference a little bit more, because I think you mentioned too that there's some unique opportunities for folks who may not have registered already to participate in that conference. So want to make sure that we get that information out there and then just connect people with resources about how they can learn more, because you gave us a lot of great information about the whys, and I think having that information would be great for our audience. So can you stick with us and hang with us before we take a break?
Yep.
You're listening to The Good Work Show.
To learn more about the show and how your company can tell their story, like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter @GoodWorkShow.
Audience, welcome back to The Good Work Show. We have been chatting with Daniel Rockberg, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Climate at Emory University, but then also is the co-founder of the Georgia Climate Project. And they are having a Georgia Climate Conference that is happening soon. I'm learning all about why climate change is super important, and a host of higher learning, education, schools, colleges are coming together really to put the focus on this issue because it is important. And Daniel, if you didn't hear it before the break, you missed a treat because Daniel went down the list of why we should care and super important things. I think one of the things that stuck out to me, Daniel, is what you said is that the people who are least likely to affect climate change are the most impacted by it negatively. And so that goes into a whole lot of other issues with equity and all kinds of things behind that. But before the break, we were chatting about how people in their daily lives, because you gave us the big whys, and those are super important. And I think we would all take pause if it were starting to snow in April or or when it's Christmas and it's 80 degrees outside. I mean, it all is familiar to all of us. We can think of those things. But for outside of just saying, oh, that's weird, and then moving on to the next thing, how do you get the average person to say, hang on, this is weird, or this is out of the norm, or we shouldn't be having all of these storms back to back? What do I need to do individually and think about those things? How does and are you tackling that at the Georgia Climate Project?
Yeah, a great question and kind of a fun topic, especially given I love that your show is focused on good news, good information, and I do think there is some hope here and something that we should really focus on. It's not just about what the risks are. And I actually think that's where it starts. For a lot of folks in the state, this issue of risks and opportunities, I think, is an important place to start. So if you run a business or if you're a government official, I think it's really important to be quite clear-eyed about what the risks are to our bottom line, whether it's to our lives, our livelihoods, our natural systems, whichever bottom lines you're focusing on. And I would hope that, especially if you look at businesses around the state, they're going to say, you know what, like there's a real risk here. Forget the politics. Just look at what we're seeing. What do we do to build resilience to those risks? And there's a self-interest, an enlightened self-interest in just doing that. And that's a way to tackle the problem. So whether you are AT&T and thinking about where to put your infrastructure, or you're a farmer in Southwest Georgia and you're thinking about what to plant and how to plant, all those things are just, I think, a place to start. What are the risks and how do we respond to those? And that leads to the opportunities, which is, first of all, if we are responding proactively, then we're going to be more resilient to the shocks and the stresses that are associated with this. And that's just going to benefit us in so many ways. It's sort of an avoided, pain point. The other thing, though, is if you think about where the world wants to go on this issue, the global community, we've said that we have an incredibly ambitious vision for having the entire planet, that's 10 billion people, having no emissions by the end of the century, much sooner, actually, to hit our targets. Let's say we get there. If we do, there's going to be a lot of money to be made by being on the front lines of that sort of new economy of the future. And so it's important for those of us in Georgia and in the Atlanta region to think about whether we want to be positioning ourselves to kind of win and lead in that clean energy future, or whether we kind of want to sit on the sidelines and let others take that. And if we think about it that way, I think there's a really strong case to be made for economic development, for jobs, for innovation, for creativity, around positioning ourselves to be some of the leaders in developing and providing the solutions that the planet is definitely going to need, not just in Georgia, but beyond. So those are some general thoughts. The other thing, though, you asked a really good question about, just folks in Georgia and Atlanta who have a lot of other issues on their mind. And to some degree, I think we collectively need to do a better job of letting those folks pursue what matters to them, whatever their North Star is, in a way that also not only achieves that North Star, but also advances the climate conversation and climate solutions. So you mentioned health. That's a great example. One of the main reasons to move forward on sustainable transportation and cleaner energy is the public health risks that are associated right now with our current transportation and current energy sources. If we make progress there, even setting aside the immense climate benefit, we're actually talking about lives and emergency room visits and illness that we're taking off the table just simply by moving those things forward. We can do that. We should do that alone for health reasons, and it has a climate benefit. Likewise, when we think about equity, we should be thinking about how do we reduce sort of disproportionate burdens in our vulnerable communities related to things like urban flooding or lack of access to food or any number of other issues. And when we think about, back to my thing about sort of winning the clean energy future, this is something we've got a lot of colleagues in the state that talk about. How do we make sure that as we build those jobs and we grow our economy, we're doing it in a way that really lifts up communities that have been previously disadvantaged? So I think there's some real opportunities there. But it's also not super straightforward, right? It's not there's no one silver bullet.
Right.
So I guess one of the things, and I'm glad we're talking to you because you might be able to answer this for me. So I feel like one of the things that maybe I don't want to call it a barrier, but just make it difficult for the average person to kind of think about the idea of climate change and things to do. The step that you just named, those are really big things. So it's like changing our transportation system. Like that's a big thing. But I think back to I like to watch a lot of old 80s television. So you watch stuff and they're talking about the ozone layer. So now we're going to recycle and we're not going to use aerosol hairspray. Like they were tangible things that individual people could do in order to move the needle forward. And I feel like a lot of times when we talk about climate change, we're talking about these big infrastructure, which needs to happen. Of course, the big infrastructure things need to happen. But I don't know that individuals see a place for them to play in that outside of advocacy or voting. So are there things that individual people can be doing, whether it's continuing to recycle, whether it's, how do you reduce your what are those types of things that folks can do that might be listening?
Yeah, very good question. It's really at the core of this. There's a lot that we can and should do individually, and I think there's kind of, even with my colleagues, we have these back and forth. Is it something that's just bigger than all of us, or it starts with all of us, it ends with all of us, and it's kind of all of the above. So if you look at the math, each of us, the three of us each probably emit about 20 tons a year. To put that in perspective, the planet emits about 45 billion tons a year, Georgia about 100 million. So those are lots of numbers, but the bottom line is it can't be true that all of us just take care of our own carbon footprint and stop there. But we all should take care of our carbon footprint and keep going. So in other words, we should be doing that and more. And so in terms of taking care of our own carbon footprint, a lot of the low-hanging fruit is thinking about, especially when we look at the nexus of economic burdens and this issue, it is things as simple as energy efficiency in homes. Atlanta, unfortunately, has one of the highest energy burdens in the country. This is the percentage of a person's income they spend on their electricity bill. And there are things that are being done now to help especially low-income consumers make their homes more efficient so that they don't face that disproportionate burden. And that obviously has a benefit for emissions too. So again, it's their North Star is the economics of it and dealing with that, but they're having this other benefit. So there are things ranged from making your home more efficient, everything from insulation to lighting, to thinking about how you do move, whether you're able to have the luxury of choosing a vehicle that's got lower emissions. There's a great colleague I met recently who's running a group that's specifically thinking about electric vehicles in communities that haven't typically thought of them as for them, and pointing out that there's this incredibly robust used vehicle market for old electric vehicles where you can get a used Nissan Leaf, for example, in the neighborhood of $5,000 or $6,000, and all of a sudden it's actually quite an affordable option relative to some of the other options on the table. So how we power our homes, how we move around, certainly air travel for those of us who do travel a lot, that's a big impact. So there are all these things that we can do personally. I also think, though, it's important that if we do this, that we do it in a community, because it's going to have a broader impact if there is a ripple effect, or even better, sort of a tidal wave effect of moving along with our neighbors. And the other thing is, honestly, this is a problem that hasn't been solved very well, which is, you're exactly right. For every one of us, it's really hard to figure out how to engage at a scale that's bigger than our 20 tons. And it's something that in the Georgia Climate Project we're giving a lot of thought to. Can we actually create a bit more of a kind of almost a brokerage that would help people understand how they could have an impact at a scale of thousands or tens of thousands of tons? And there are things. The one great example is there are these campaigns that have gone around the state to sign up homes to go solar. And if they get more homes, the solar is cheaper. So we had students at Emory, for example, doing phone banking for that. And, if they can get a couple more homes to go solar, they've done a pretty good job for the day. It's way beyond their own carbon footprint. But I think we have to do a better job of giving folks the footholds and handholds to find out how to have a bigger impact than their own personal footprint.
Yeah.
So, Daniel, where can folks get the information? So you mentioned a lot of, and you have a lot of academic partners. So obviously there's work being done at the colleges and universities teaching the students. But for the average average listener on our show or the average watcher of our YouTube channel. So if they are saying, well, this is great, how do I find out more? We've got about a minute and a half left on the show. How do they find out all of these facts and put the pieces together, maybe even calculate their own carbon footprint, but really just making those small changes that you mentioned? Is there a list? Is there information that the Georgia Climate Project is putting out? Tell us how you're doing the education piece. Since you have all those educators around the table, I know there's something there.
I think the easiest one-stop shop coming up is going to be this conference. So, it's November 7th and 8th. We are unfortunately at capacity and have, unfortunately, a very long wait list, which is a good problem, but a problem because we really want this to be something that engages a very broad community. But we are going to be webcasting the conference, so that will be a great starting point, and certainly the conference website, because you're going to see topics and speakers, and any one of those folks. The whole idea of what we're doing is to try to strengthen the network in the state so that we have hundreds, if not more, people around the state who are just looking at pieces of this and working on pieces of this that can be resources to the folks you mentioned. So one place to start is there. On the main website, georgiaclimateproject.org, which has the conference information, we are also going to be rolling out in the months and years ahead a series of products that are meant to provide information. One of them is called Georgia Climate Stories, where, to kind of come back to where we started, it's about how do we understand from a first-person perspective how this affects lives and livelihoods in Georgia, and how do we tell those stories, because that's much more meaningful to all of us than charts and graphs. So that's one thing we'll be doing. We will be working on kind of a knowledge and information portal over the months and years of trying to make sure that we're providing this information in a digestible manner that's useful for decision makers and experts and practitioners. And we're really open to suggestions. And I'm going to end by saying, we are also not the only ones doing this, right? We don't want to be a monopoly on this issue in the state. We need as many voices and networks in the state working this. And I've seen some really great examples of NGOs and other groups doing, movie screenings and block parties and other convenings around this issue. And I think we need all of that.
Well, great. Well, Daniel, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Good luck on the conference. Thank you so much to you and the Georgia Climate Project for the work that you're doing. And we appreciate your time today.
Thanks very much to both of you. I really appreciate your having us on.
Absolutely. You're listening to The Good Work Show.
To learn more about the show and how your company can tell their story, like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter @GoodWorkShow.
Audience, welcome back to The Good Work Show. We are excited because on the line with us, we have Keith Jennings, who is the Vice President of Community Impact for Jackson Healthcare. Keith, welcome to the show.
I'm so happy to be a part of this. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, first of all, we want to know a little bit about Jackson Healthcare. So can you fill us in? Can you give us some background on the organization?
Absolutely. So Jackson Healthcare, we're based up in Alpharetta in the Atlanta metropolitan area. A lot of people think when they hear the name that we're a hospital or a group of hospitals, and we're actually not. We're a group of staffing companies. So we're a kind of a family of staffing search and technology companies with about 1,500 associates and been around since 2000.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I would have thought you were a
Me too.
hospital too.
And coming
Very
from South
common.
Florida, there's Jackson.
Very common assumption,
There's
isn't it?
Jackson Memorial Hospital, so I just always
so
assume.
you thought it, yeah.
Learn something today.
Uh-huh.
So, Keith, your title is the Vice President of Community Impact. So talk to us a little bit about what Jackson Healthcare is doing to kind of go beyond their day-to-day business and really reach into the community.
Absolutely. So it starts with our mission. And our mission is to improve the delivery of patient care in the lives of everyone we touch. And, we say kind of jokingly the first part, improving the delivery of patient care, that makes a lot of sense for a group of staffing companies that serve hospitals, that serve physician groups, that serve clinics around the U.S. But that last part, to improve the lives of everyone we touch, we kind of jokingly say that kind of makes this a little weird, but it's something we're really proud of. And that is the life of everyone we touch. So that starts for us internally with our associates. It extends to the partners and vendors we work with on a day-to-day basis. And, of course, it extends out to the doctors, the nurses, the therapists, the pharmacists, the hospitals, the clinics, and everyone else that we serve through our various businesses. But really, we say that's at our core who we focus on, but we don't want it to start there. Kind of the heart of our organization is that we really believe that business can be a force of good in the world. And we believe that at such a core level, we make that a part of what we do. So that's why it's a part of the mission. It's a dual mission, and it's a part of everything we do when it comes to community impact. So we're really looking at, where are pains in the local community? Where are pains in the world? How can we, given what we do, address those needs in proactive ways? And a core philosophy of ours, and it's kind of the legacy we're hoping to build, which is, how do we provide a hand up to people rather than a hand out? So how do we preserve the dignity of people out there, and then by coming along beside them, we're not just kind of coming in for a moment. We're truly there to walk with them and help them through that. And so that's kind of our mission and how that kind of flows out of our values. But the key for us, we call our community impact Love Lifts. And so when I say that, just kind of think of it as a phrase, Love Lifts. So we want everything we do to kind of come out of that spirit of lifting others through acts of love. And we know we can't do that for everybody. There's, I think the last stats I saw, over 70,000 nonprofits in the state of Georgia, 1.5 million in the U.S., and I think over 10 million worldwide. There's no way any business can make a dent in that universe. But with focus, you can make a huge impact in little ways. And so for us, we kind of say, given who we are and what our values are as a business, our two areas of impact are improving access to health care for people in the world. So we look for organizations, we look for programming that kind of solves that in various ways through nonprofit means, and we partner with those organizations and really try to pour into them. Then the second area is we really have a heart for young people. So we really look to partner with organizations and provide programming that lifts the well-being of young people in a variety of ways. So that's kind of the core of who we are and the kind of the philosophy we're coming from and how it kind of flows out of our mission, our organizational mission, and our values.
Yeah. So you know what, Keith, that's a lot, and you're taking on a lot. But tell us about the impact of Love Lifts. So what has it had on the community of bringing all of these folks together and lifting everyone out?
Absolutely, and community is a great word because that's local, and that moves for us from local to statewide in the state of Georgia, all the way nationally and globally. So kind of areas of impact for us is, and it takes on a lot of forms, we provide orphans around the world with free medical care. We send medical supplies to fill shortages we see. We even have physicians that are part of our locum tenens businesses that travel to other countries to perform kind of long-awaited life-saving surgeries. We provide telemedicine to kids around the world through partnerships with doctors. So the impact kind of extends. It's quite broad and vast, but we really are seeing the needle moved kind of through initiatives and programming like that. And then internally, so that's kind of external community impact, but we really don't stop there. We think of it as internal as well. How are we impacting the lives of our associates, which is what we call our employees? How are we impacting their lives? How are we impacting their families? And so we do everything from have a pretty robust matching gifts program to where we match dollar for dollar any giving that our associates do, to where we pay $25 or donate $25 per volunteer hour for any associate who volunteers on their personal time, and we offer them on the clock as well as personal time opportunities to go out and find something that they care about that connects with their heart and their personal values, and we just try to empower them and kind of going back to our theme, kind of lift them in their efforts as they go out to serve others.
That's great. So When you were talking about impacts, you were telling us about all the great stuff that you guys are doing kind of globally around the world.
Yes.
But this year you've started something that's right here in the Atlanta metro area. So tell us a little bit about what you've got going on right here at home.
Yes, we've got two initiatives, but it all flows into one, and we call it Love Lifts Village. So we've just gone through a pretty significant campus expansion here in Alpharetta, and that's allowed us to kind of create growing space for our companies. But kind of the neat thing that came out of that is we wound up with one of the buildings on our campus that we knew it just had space, going to have space in it for the foreseeable future. And so Shane Jackson, our president, kind of had the vision for what if we open that office space up and offer it to nonprofits. It could be individuals, could be small ministries, all the way up to larger nonprofit organizations. And so we named it Love Lifts Village, kind of flowing out of our mission, our community impact mission. And essentially what we're doing is our vision for this is really, as we've worked with all these great nonprofit organizations over the years, we kind of see that so many, they're working so hard in their field, in their mission, in their programming. They tend to almost kind of exist in silos of no fault of their own, just by nature of working in their areas. And we just thought, how great would it be to have an environment that kind of fosters community, kind of fosters collaboration, that allows for idea sharing and best practice sharing. And so, and the vision of Love Lifts Village is that. Here we've got an area on a safe campus. We'd love to provide office space to nonprofits and meet them where they are in their mission and in their journey. And we're offering everything from single cubes. So if somebody says, I just need a cube and I just need it I need some flexible area for a little while, we've got that to offer, all the way up to larger suites for larger organizations. And I'm happy to say we kind of officially opened in September of this year, and we've already got tenants in, and we've got more moving in, but we've got plenty of space. So I'm really excited to kind of get the word out there to any nonprofits that could use some office space help, and we'd love to provide that.
Oh, that's a fantastic resource. And did you say that was free of charge for nonprofits?
We do it on different ways. So one of going back to our original philosophy of we want to provide a handout, not a handout, as we really do as we work with nonprofits, want to foster independence.
Yep.
So we want them to be scalable. We want them to be sustainable. We want to help them be able to function and grow in a sustainable way. So that we do have rent areas, but for our areas super flexible. So and then we've got grants and other things available to those who qualify. So we're just looking. A lot of what I'm looking for is tell me about your mission, tell me about your organization, and let me work to figure out ways we can support and help you.
Well, that's fantastic. You know what, Keith, that's an awesome resource. I'm so glad that you shared it on the show because for us, that's what we do. We feature nonprofits, and there are a lot of smaller ones or ones that are just getting started that could probably benefit from having office space or even just being in the same space as other nonprofits as they share ideas and build their business. We're going into our last minute, Keith, and I want to make sure that we get information out about the organization. So how can folks who are listening who maybe want to take advantage of your services, or even if there are other nonprofits who are interested in moving into the village, so to speak, can you give us some information about how they can learn more?
Absolutely. Simplest thing is just to go to jacksonhealthcare.com. And from our website, you can learn anything you want to learn about us, read stories, watch video stories, because we do profiles each month on the nonprofits we support and partner with, and they can, on our website, can search for Love Lifts Village and find information on that as well.
All right. Well, we enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you to you and Shane and the rest of the Jackson Healthcare team for the work that you're doing to support nonprofits in our community. We really appreciate it.
Well, we really appreciate you. We're so thankful that you have the mission you have and that you're trying to accomplish what you're doing. We're so happy to come alongside and try to help with that. Thank you for what you do.
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure talking to you. You're listening to The Good Work Show.